I don't remember the thunder that night. They told me later it shook the whole town, rattled window panes made the dog across the street bark until his voice cracked. But I didn't hear a thing. I was 8, curled up in a pink flannel nightgown I got for Christmas, fast asleep beneath a hand-stitched quilt that smelled like cedar and starch. That was the last time I ever slept through a storm. My name is Margaret Ann Holloway. I'm 83 now, and I remember a great many things. Things I wish I could forget, and things I'm terrified I'll lose. But I hold on to that night like a pin in a map, the place where everything began to bend. We didn't know, of course. We never do until it's far too late. It was spring in Maple Glen. The kind of spring that still wears a coat and keeps one hand in winter's pocket. Our house sat at the edge of a gravel road with lilac bushes just starting to bloom beside the porch. Mama said the smell meant hope was coming. I used to believe her. That night, she tucked me in just after 7. Daddy was sick again. His lungs sounded like rain on a tin roof, and Mama was tired. She kissed my forehead, turned on the radio real low, and whispered, "Sleep tight, sweet pea. You're safe." I wanted to believe that too. I drifted off to the sound of a gospel hymn, the one Grandma used to hum while shelling peas. Outside, clouds gathered like secrets. Inside, I dreamed of lemonade and daisy chains. I didn't know someone else was coming. The next morning, I woke up to bacon sizzling and Mama humming in the kitchen. I padded out in my nightgown, rubbing my eyes, and saw a man sitting at our table. His back was to me broad and straight. He wore a khaki jacket with army patches, and his hair was too neat, too black. Mama turned and beamed. "Oh, sugar, look who's here," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's your Uncle Roy. He's back from Korea." He turned around slowly, that smile stretching wide like he'd practiced it. He had a dimple on his left cheek and a scar on his jaw I didn't remember. "There she is," he said, his voice all sugar and sunshine. "My little Margie." No one had called me that in years. He pulled something from his duffel bag, a box of Whitman's sampler chocolates tied with a gold ribbon. "Got these special," he said, sliding it across the table. "Thought of you every day." I don't remember what I said. Maybe thank you. Maybe nothing. I do remember Mama beaming, saying how good it was to have family around again, and Daddy coughing so hard in the bedroom that the walls seemed to sigh. Uncle Roy stayed that whole day. He played checkers with me on the porch, asked about school, told stories about soldiers and snow and bravery. His laugh was loud, his eyes too kind. But that night, after Mama went to bed and the radio played soft hymns again, I heard a creak on the floorboards. Just one. I froze. The air changed thick like soup. Then a whisper through the crack in my door. "Sweet pea, you awake." My throat closed. I didn't answer. The door opened halfway. He stood there holding a small stuffed bear, the kind you win at the fair. He stepped in just enough to place it on my dresser. "For the nights that feel lonely," he said. Then as quiet as he came, he left. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until morning light crept through the curtains. The bear sat there watching me, still smiling. At breakfast, Mama said, "Wasn't it nice to see Roy again? He's such a blessing. Like having Daddy's brother back is healing us piece by piece." I nodded. And from that morning on, I never slept through another storm, not even the quiet ones. Because I'd learned something in my bones. Not all storms rattle windows. Some creep in through the door with a smile and a box of chocolates. He brought chocolate every time. Milk chocolate with caramel, dark chocolate with raspberry, even white chocolate bark with peppermint flakes near Christmas. He said he bought them just for me because I was his best girl. And Mama smiled like it was the sweetest thing a man could say to a little girl. For a while, I believed her. Because when you're 8, then 9, and the world around you is still a little blurry with bedtime stories and schoolyard chalk, you want to believe good things. You want to believe kindness can't wear a mask.
But masks can look like uncles, and candy can taste like forgetting.
Roy didn't move in exactly. He just never left. Said he was between jobs, needed a place to stay, and Mama was always one to help family. Daddy was getting worse by then, barely left the bed, and Mama needed hands around the house. Roy painted the porch, fixed the leaking sink, drove Mama to the store. He made himself useful in ways that made his presence seem necessary. And me, I learned to smile at the right moments, to say thank you for the peanut butter cups, to laugh when he tousled my hair too long. I remember one afternoon, it must have been late May, he picked me up from school in a borrowed truck. He said, "Surprise. We're skipping homework today. You and me, Margie. I'm taking you for a treat." I didn't want to go. I had a spelling test to study for. But Mama had already said yes. He drove me to the fairgrounds, even though the fair wasn't in town. The booths were closed, the rides folded like sleeping creatures. He parked under a willow tree and pulled out a paper bag with 2 sodas and a chocolate bar. "Just us," he said. No interruptions. He talked and talked about war, about honor, about the loneliness of coming home and not being needed. I listened like a good girl does. When he reached over to brush a crumb from my cheek, I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't the chocolate. That night, I put the candy in my dresser drawer instead of eating it. It stayed there for weeks untouched. By the end of summer, there were 7 unopened boxes in a row, lined up like soldiers standing at attention. I started calling them my warning signs. Mama didn't notice, or she didn't want to. She was always tired by then, her eyes shadowed even in the morning. Once I asked her, "Why does Uncle Roy have to live here?" She paused in folding towels, looked up slowly. "Honey, he's family. We take care of our own. And you know your daddy can't do much these days. Roy's helping." Helping. That word echoed in my ears like something hollow. Some nights he knocked. Not loud, just a soft tap like a question left unanswered. I never said yes, but he'd open the door anyway, come in just far enough to place something on my desk, a pencil, a ribbon, a tin of mints. Gifts that felt more like claims. And then there were the days he didn't bring anything. Those were worse, because those days he'd just look. Too long, too quiet. And when I looked away, I felt him still there, carving his presence into the walls like fingerprints you can't scrub out. One morning, I woke to find my favorite drawing missing from the fridge. A sketch I'd done of our dog Tilly chasing butterflies. I searched everywhere. Later, I found it folded in Roy's wallet, tucked behind a picture of his old army unit. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to hear the answer. Instead, I began to mark the days. Not on a calendar, but on the baseboard under my bed. One notch for each visit, each whisper, each time he left something behind. By July, the wood looked like it had been clawed by a frightened animal. Maybe it had. I tried to tell Mama again, sort of. I asked her, "Did you ever not like someone, even if everyone else said they were good?" She frowned, half listening, stirring soup. What a strange thing to say, honey. Why would you ask that?
I shrugged. No reason. She kissed my forehead, handed me a spoon, said Roy means well. He's just had a hard life. Try to be sweet, okay? Sweet. I hated that word more than chocolate by then.
That night, when Roy left a glass bird on my pillow, a delicate little thing with painted blue wings, I wrapped it in tissue and hid it behind the loose brick in the fireplace. It didn't belong with me. It never had. And that was the first time I dreamed of shouting. In the dream, I screamed so loud the window shattered. Mama rushed in, holding a flashlight, Grandma behind her with a broom. But when I opened my mouth to yell again, no sound came out. Just smoke. Just the echo of silence. I woke up biting my blanket eyes wide, heart thudding like I'd run miles. And in the hallway, a shadow moved past my door. Just one step, then nothing. It was pink with tiny white roses. Mama had sewn it herself from leftover fabric, soft and thin like petals, with sleeves that fluttered when I turned. She gave it to me the week before my 9th birthday, folded neat inside a brown paper bag tied with twine. I wore it exactly once. The night was muggy, one of those southern summer nights where the air presses against your skin like a damp sheet. The fan in my window clicked with every turn, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted in from the vines outside. I remember thinking it smelled too sweet, sickly sweet like syrup left out in the sun. Mama had tucked me in early as usual. Daddy's coughing had worsened, and she said I needed rest before church in the morning. She kissed my cheek, her lips cool and dry, and whispered, "Sleep tight, birthday girl." Roy had been out that afternoon fixing the fence or running errands I don't remember. But when he came home, he whistled through the hall like nothing in the world could touch him. He always whistled when he wanted to be heard. I turned away from the door and pulled the quilt up over my shoulder, even though the heat made my neck damp. I clutched my pillow and told myself to breathe slow, count backwards from 100. Somewhere around 72, the doorknob turned. He didn't knock this time. Just stepped in quiet like the house was his. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. "That new nightgown looks mighty pretty, Margie. Just like your mama at your age." I remember the way the fan stopped clicking for a moment. Like even the air didn't want to move. He sat at the edge of the bed. His weight shifted the mattress, made my hips slide toward him. I held my breath. "You know I love you, right?" he said. "Love you more than anything." I nodded, because that's what you do when you're scared and small, and the rules are all written in someone else's handwriting. Then he reached out and touched my hair. Just a stroke down the side of my face, but it felt like lightning under my skin. I flinched. "Don't be scared," he said gently. "It's just our secret. A good kind of secret." I wanted to scream, but my throat felt full of wet cotton. He stood up then, just like that, and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back and smiled. "Sweet dreams, pretty girl." He didn't even close the door all the way. I lay there for hours, staring at the shadow on the wall. The fan resumed its clicking, but nothing felt normal again. Not even the sound of Mama washing dishes downstairs, humming gospel under her breath. In the morning, I took off the nightgown and folded it carefully into the back of my drawer. Then I shoved the drawer shut and never opened it again. From that day on, I wore only my oldest pajamas, the ones with holes in the knees, the ones that didn't make me look pretty, the ones that smelled like soap and dust, not roses and innocence. Mama never asked why. Maybe she thought I was just being stubborn. Maybe she noticed and chose silence. Or maybe, just maybe, she was surviving in her own way too. The days blurred after that. Roy bought me a new brush, said I should wear my hair down more. Mama called him thoughtful. I called him something else in my head, where the words were allowed to live. Every time he passed me in the hallway, I shrank just a little, curled into myself like paper set near fire. I tried to avoid him, kept my door locked when I could stayed outside longer than I should lingered near Daddy, even though he hardly spoke anymore. But Roy was everywhere. In the way Mama smiled at his jokes, in the way he carved the Sunday ham, in the way neighbors clapped his back and said, "Glad you're back, soldier." No one saw what I did. No one noticed the way his hand lingered on my shoulder, or the way my laughter stopped before the punchline. One afternoon, I came home from school and found the nightgown gone. I tore through my drawer. Nothing. I checked the laundry basket, the clothesline under the bed. Gone. Later that evening, I saw it, hanging on the hook in Roy's room beside his khaki jacket. Clean, pressed, hanging like a trophy. That night, I cried for the first time in weeks. Silent tears rolled slow across the bridge of my nose and into my pillow. I didn't sob, didn't move. Just let it all slide out like water from a cracked cup. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but the words kept getting tangled in shame, because no one told me what to do when a man smiles too sweet, when candy comes with conditions, when the people you're supposed to trust feel like locked doors and hidden keys. So I stayed quiet, and the nightgown stayed on that hook. And every night, after I stared at that hook through the crack in his door, waiting to see if it would still be there. When I was little, I thought Mama's word was law. If she said a bruise was nothing, I believed it would fade. If she said prayers worked, I folded my hands without question. And when she said Roy is a good man, you're lucky to have him around, I bit my tongue and nodded. Because what else does a child do when the only voice that could save her doesn't listen? The summer Roy moved in stretched long and cruel. The sun beat down on our tin roof like a warning. I kept hoping anything would make it stop. A lightning bolt, a fire, a letter calling him back to war. But no miracles came. Only longer days, more knocks at the door, more presents on my pillow. Mama still saw the man who fixed sinks, mowed the yard, and bought her roses on Tuesdays. She'd beam when she told neighbors I don't know how I'd manage without Roy. They'd nod, smile, and say, "That man's a blessing." I stopped correcting them. It wasn't worth the ache. One Sunday after church, Mama made lemon bars and invited the pastor's wife for tea. I tried to stay outside picking at dandelions, but she called me in her voice sharp, "Margaret Ann, don't be rude now." So I sat, hands folded, lips pressed tight. The pastor's wife asked about school. Mama answered for me. Roy poured lemonade and winked, and I wished I were invisible. When they left, Mama scolded me for being quiet. "You're not a ghost, you know. Use your words." I wanted to scream. "You never hear them anyway." But I didn't. Instead, I asked softly, "Do you think Roy's good?" She blinked. "Of course I do. Even when he's strange." Her smile faded just a little. "He's been through war, baby. Things linger. Doesn't mean he's not kind." I looked down at my lap. My fingernails had dug tiny crescents into my palms. "You don't feel safe?" she asked, her voice suddenly low. I hesitated. "Sometimes he watches me weird." She exhaled through her nose, closed her eyes. "Margaret, that man risked his life overseas. He's been nothing but generous since he came home. Are you trying to make trouble?" That word stuck like a thorn trouble, as if I were the storm, not the damage it left behind. That night, I cried in the bathroom, turned the faucet on so she wouldn't hear. I pressed my forehead to the cold tile and mouthed the words, "Help me," to the soap dish. Mama didn't bring it up again, but she did start locking her own door at night. I heard the click one evening when I passed by to use the restroom. Just a soft click, but it echoed down my spine. I wasn't sure if it was to keep Roy out or me. Things got colder between us, even as the air thickened with summer heat. She stopped brushing my hair at night, stopped asking about school. If I was quiet, she let me stay that way. One morning, I came down for breakfast and found Roy sitting at the table alone. Mama's Bible lay open beside a cold cup of coffee. "She's gone to the store," he said, smiling. "Left me in charge." I backed away, but he called out, "Margie, wait. I got something for you." I froze. He pulled a necklace from his pocket, a tiny gold locket with a flower etched on the front. "Found it at the antique shop. Thought it looked like you." I didn't want it. I didn't want anything from him, but I took it, because saying no felt like daring a snake to strike. I didn't wear it. I hid it under my mattress. That night, when Mama came home and found the locket in my drawer while changing sheets, she smiled like it was Christmas. "Did Roy give you this?" "Oh, honey, it's beautiful." I stared at her. "You can have it." She laughed. "It's yours. You should treasure it. A girl's first locket's special." I wanted to scream, "Take it, take him, take it all," and get out of my room. A week later, I left a note on her pillow. Just 6 words: "He scares me. Please believe me." She never mentioned it, but I found it in the trash the next morning, crumpled under an orange peel. After that, something inside me shut down. Like a fuse blew in the middle of a storm. I stopped trying to tell her, stopped meeting her eyes. She started calling me moody, difficult, too grown for your own good. And I shrank into the corners of rooms, learned how to hold my breath until danger passed. The only one who noticed was Grandma. She came that fall. Her knees had stiffened with age, and her breath came short, but her eyes were sharper than ever. She took one look at me and frowned. "You're quieter than I remember," she said, pouring sweet tea. "You used to hum while tying your shoes." I shrugged. That night, she tucked me in like old times, running her fingers over my forehead. "You know," she whispered, "I taught your mama everything she knows, except how to listen when her heart's afraid." I stared at her. My throat tightened. She kissed my cheek and added, "But I know, and I'm not afraid to hear." I didn't say anything then, just nodded. But something cracked open in my chest, like a window finally let to breathe. I didn't know it yet, but she had seen enough. And that small knowing was the first real safety I'd felt in months. The next morning, she asked Mama to go for a walk. And when they came back, Mama wouldn't meet my eyes for the rest of the day. In Maple Glen, women stitched secrets into fabric. They called it the quilting circle, but it was more than that. It was where the women of the church came to sip sweet tea and share every whisper they swore they hadn't meant to spread. It was tradition. And like most traditions in small towns, it stitched you in whether you liked it or not. Mama brought me along every second Thursday. Said it would teach me patience, grace, and proper womanhood. I was 10 small for my age and already knew more about quiet suffering than any of the women hunched around that oval table with their thimbles and tails. That fall, they were working on a quilt for the pastor's new baby. Pale blues and lemon yellow, tiny embroidered lambs on each square. I was assigned to help iron the backing fabric and pass spools of thread. I didn't mind. It kept my hands busy. kept my mind off the man who slept in the room next to mine. Roy had started watching me in new ways. Not just at night. At breakfast, he'd brush against me at the counter. In the truck, his eyes lingered in the mirror longer than the road required. And still, Mama didn't see, but Grandma did. And she'd started dropping subtle things into her conversations with Mama, remarks about boundaries, about listening to a child's silence. Mama would nod, tight-lipped. Nothing changed. At Quilting Circle, though, the women noticed me in another way. "You're so quiet," Margaret Mrs. Ruth said, adjusting her glasses as she stitched a corner. "Used to be, you were bright as a bell." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't supposed to be heard anyway. "She's just growing," Mama answered quickly, patting my head like I was a dog. Hormones and all that. The women laughed. I smiled on the outside. The next meeting, I accidentally spilled a bit of lemonade on the edge of the fabric. Just a splash, barely noticeable. But Mrs. Beverly raised an eyebrow. Careless hands don't belong near precious work. My cheeks burned. I whispered an apology, but no one looked up. After that, the circle changed. The women didn't say much to me anymore. If I spoke, they nodded vaguely and turned back to their stitching. If I laughed, the sound felt too loud. Then one day, I caught two of them whispering. I'd gone to the hallway to get more pins. As I passed by the slightly cracked kitchen door, I heard my name. Strange little girl lately. Can't be easy living with a man who's not her father. Still, you'd think her mother would keep her in line. I stopped breathing. They didn't know I heard. Or maybe they did. But when I stepped back into the room, silence folded over the table like another layer of batting. That night, I asked Mama if I could stop going. She frowned. "You love quilting." I shook my head. "Not anymore," she sighed. "Margaret, we don't quit just because things feel uncomfortable. Those women are part of your future." But I already knew if they were part of my future, I didn't want it. A week later, Grandma asked me to help her gather kindling behind the shed. It was one of those early November mornings when the frost hadn't quite thawed and the leaves crackled like secrets underfoot. She didn't speak at first, just let me follow her stacking branches in the woven basket. Then gently, she asked, "They treating you different at Quilting Circle?" I nodded. I heard them talking about me. She knelt beside me, her knees creaking. People fear what makes them uncomfortable, and nothing makes folks more nervous than a girl who holds her truth like a knife. I looked at her. "But I haven't said anything." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes they can just see it in your eyes, and they look away not to protect you, but to protect themselves." Her words sat heavy in my chest. Then she placed a hand on mine. "You don't have to stitch yourself into their pattern, baby. Some quilts aren't worth being part of." The Sunday after that, Mama didn't ask me to go to Circle. She just looked at me over her coffee and said, "Fine, stay home, but you'll regret not having women in your corner when you're older." I didn't answer, because the truth was, I already felt the cold edge of a corner. And the only woman who'd stayed in it with me was the one whose hands trembled from age, but held me steadier than all the rest. One afternoon, as Grandma and I were stringing popcorn to hang for Christmas, I asked her why people pretended not to see. She answered without pause. "Because seeing means choosing, and choosing means doing something. Most folks would rather stay blind than brave." I nodded, and that night, I wrote in my notebook under the floorboard for the first times. "Mama said Roy was good, but good doesn't knock without asking. Good doesn't stare like he's owed something. Good doesn't make you afraid of lemonade and lace." I folded the page and pressed it down beneath the loose board. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My words,
my truth.
And if no one else would carry it with me, then I'd carry it myself. That winter, the quilting circle gave Mama a framed embroidery that read, "Bless this home and all who enter." She hung it in the hallway. I walked past it every day and tried not to cry. Grandma's hands were soft, but never weak. They smelled faintly of lavender and ivory soap, and they moved with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of making do. She stitched clothes, baked biscuits, rubbed Vicks on fevered chests. Her fingers were bent at the joints, knuckles slightly swollen from decades of scrubbing and kneading and holding things together. She had what the women at church called working hands, but to me, they were the safest place I'd ever known. The week before Christmas, the weather turned bitter. The kind of cold that made you wear 2 pairs of socks and wrap your hair in a scarf before stepping outside. Roy chopped wood behind the house with too much force, like the axe was punishing him for something. Each thud echoed through the walls like a warning. I stayed in my room most days, pretending to read. I traced the knots on my wooden floor with my finger. I memorized the creak of every board in the hallway. I learned how to breathe so quietly I didn't fog the glass. Mama decorated the house like always. Garland on the banister. Red bows on the front porch. The ceramic nativity on the side table missing baby Jesus's left hand, but still glowing gold under the lamp. But something about that year felt hollow. She hummed fewer carols. Her smiles didn't reach her eyes. I noticed her glancing at Grandma more often, quick sideways glances, like she was trying to read a book written in a language she'd forgotten. Grandma didn't say much, but she was always watching. She moved through the house like she was looking for something or someone. Then one afternoon it happened. I was setting the table for supper, 3 plates, 3 forks, 1 glass for Mama's sweet tea. Daddy had passed away 2 weeks earlier quietly in his sleep. His body had become a whisper long before that. I didn't cry. There wasn't space inside me for more sadness, just layers of numb. Roy came in from the cold, stomping snow from his boots. His jacket was open, cheeks flushed. He smiled too wide.
"There's my girl," he said.
My hands clenched around the spoon I was laying down.
"That dress looks nice on you, Margie."
It was an old navy blue one handed down from a cousin. Nothing special, but the way he said it made my spine lock up. Before I could speak, I felt something.
A hand, light but firm.
Grandma's hand resting on my shoulder.
She'd come into the room without a sound. She didn't say a word. She just stood beside me, tall, straight, steady, and looked at Roy. Not cruel, not angry, just certain. And Roy paused, just for a second, but it was enough. He lowered his eyes, rubbed the back of his neck, muttered something about washing up, and turned away. I exhaled slowly. That night, I sat by the fire with Grandma while Mama peeled apples in the kitchen. Grandma handed me a ball of yarn and 2 needles.
"I'm going to teach you to knit," she said.
I blinked.
"Why? Because it's good for your hands. And when your hands are busy, your mind can rest. You need that sugar." So we sat clumsy and quiet, my stitches too loose, her voice calm and even.
"You know," she said after a while, "some men look at girls like there's something owed. Like love's a debt, and you're the payment." I didn't speak. She reached over and fixed my knot. "But you're not a debt, and you sure as heaven ain't his to claim."
Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them back.
"I didn't think anyone saw," I whispered.
Her hand brushed my cheek.
"Baby, I saw before you did."
Christmas Eve came with snow that coated the town in silver silence. The church bells rang at 5. Mama insisted we go to the candlelight service. I didn't want to, but Grandma said gently, Sometimes light feels sweeter after dark. So I put on my coat and scarf. We walked the few blocks to the little white church with the crooked cross. The inside glowed with golden light smells of cinnamon and pine filling the air. Roy sat beside Mama. I sat between them and Grandma, and the whole time I felt her hand resting lightly on my knee. During silent night, they passed out candles. I watched the flame dance on the edge of my paper cup. So small, so fragile. But even a small flame keeps away the dark. Back home, I went straight to bed. Grandma followed me in, tucked me under the quilt. Before leaving, she knelt down beside me. "If he ever comes in," she said calmly, "you scream, don't whisper, don't wait. I'll be up." I nodded. She kissed my forehead. "You are not alone anymore." He didn't come in that night, or the one after. And for the first time in a year, I slept. Not all the way through, not without dreams, but I slept. And in the morning, there was a small gift at the foot of my bed, not from Roy. Wrapped in a flour sack tied with red yarn, inside a pair of soft wool mittens. Hand knitted, my favorite color. A note pinned to one. "Your hands will grow, but never forget they're your own. Love, Grandma." On New Year's Eve, Roy announced he'd be moving on soon. Mama smiled. Grandma just nodded. I didn't say a word, but I gripped those mittens tight under the table, and for the first time, I believed I might make it. They said it was for my own good. Mama framed it like an opportunity. "A change of scenery will do you well, Margaret. Clear your head, give you space to grow." Grandma didn't say much, just packed a small suitcase and made sure my favorite wool mittens were on top. I was 11, old enough to know when people weren't telling the whole truth. The arrangement was this: I'd stay with Aunt Clara, Mama's younger sister, for a few months. Clara lived 2 towns over in a ramshackle farmhouse with her husband and twin boys. I'd visited twice before for Thanksgiving. The boys were loud, the house drafty, but it felt far, and far meant safe. Roy didn't speak the morning I left. Just sat at the table stirring his coffee so hard it sloshed. Mama helped load the car, smoothing my hair with a hand that trembled at the edges. "You'll come back better," she said, voice thin as thread. From what I asked. She didn't answer. The drive was quiet. Grandma insisted on taking me herself, though her joints protested the whole way. "Why am I really going?" I asked halfway through the drive, the trees whipping past like questions. She kept her eyes on the road. Because someone in that house needed to be reminded where the line is. I didn't push. I didn't have to. We arrived just before dusk. Aunt Clara greeted us in a flurry of apron and perfume. "Look at you, Miss Margaret, thinner than last year. Lord, your mama feeding you enough." I smiled weakly. Clara didn't mean harm, but her words always hit sideways. Her husband, Tom, shook my hand too hard. The twins barely noticed me as they ran past with a soccer ball and muddy shoes. Grandma helped settle me into the upstairs room, the one with the slanted ceiling and a window that rattled when the wind got fussy. Before she left, she sat on the edge of the bed. "Write to me if anything feels off. I'll come back. Will, Mama?" She hesitated. If she remembers how? Then she kissed my forehead, tucked the mittens under my pillow, and left without turning back. The first week was fine. Clara kept me busy with chores, laundry, peeling potatoes, helping the boys with homework. Tom ignored me mostly. At night, I wrote in my notebook and hid the pages beneath the loose floorboard by the dresser. But safe isn't always the same as loved. There was no softness in Clara's hugs, no space in her house for silence. The boys were loud and rough. They called me church mouse and laughed when I flinched at sudden sounds. I didn't explain. What was the point?
I got a letter from Grandma every Friday. Always the same neat handwriting, always ending with, "Your story matters even when others try to fold it into theirs." She never mentioned Roy or Mama. But between the lines, I could feel the tension like a thread pulled tight, but not yet snapped. One cold morning in February, I found Mama's name on the return address instead of Grandma's. My hand shook as I opened it. "Margaret, I hope you're feeling better. Roy fixed the sink yesterday. Says the house feels quiet without you. I've been tired. Maybe that's just winter. I found your church dress under your bed, wrinkled and torn. You should be more careful with your things. Come home for Easter. We'll bake a pie. Love, Mama." I read it twice, then a third time. Not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she say she missed me. Just that the house was quiet, that my dress was wrinkled, that Roy had noticed my absence. I folded the letter, placed it between the mattress and the wall. That night, I had a dream. I was walking through our house in Maple Glen, but it was empty. No furniture, no pictures, just Roy's whistle echoing down the hallway. I ran room to room looking for Grandma, for Mama, for anyone, but no one answered. When I woke, I couldn't stop shaking. 2 days later, Tom came home drunk. I'd never seen him like that before, slurring words, stumbling into chairs. He shouted at Clara about something burned in the oven. Then he looked at me. "Quiet girl," he muttered. "Think you're better than us." I didn't reply, just kept folding the dish towel. He stepped closer. I smelled beer and sweat and something sour underneath. But Clara stepped between us, planted both palms on his chest. "Not tonight, Tom." He backed down, grumbling, slamming the screen door behind him. That night, Clara brought me cocoa. "Your mother never was strong with truth," she said, sipping her own. "But she loves you. Just don't always know how." I stared into my cup. "That's not enough." She nodded once. "No sugar, it's not." By March, I started counting the days until Easter. Not because I wanted to go home, but because I needed to know what Mama would choose. Would she leave Roy? Would she ask me real questions? Would she even meet my eyes? I didn't expect her to become a hero. I just hoped she'd become awake. The day before I was due to return, a second letter arrived. From Grandma. Just one sentence scrawled in pencil. "You'll have to decide what kind of silence you can live with." The road to Maple Glen felt shorter this time, not because the distance had changed, but because I no longer watched the trees hoping they'd hide me. I sat in the back seat of Grandma's Buick with my arms folded over my chest and my suitcase at my feet. The mittens were tucked into my coat pocket, even though it was too warm for wool. "You don't have to stay," Grandma had whispered the night before. "I do," I replied. "Why?" "Because this time, I'll know how to see it for what it is." She didn't push, just placed a Bible in my hand and said, "If the world goes quiet again, let this talk to you." Mama greeted us on the porch apron dusted with flour. Her smile was strained, the kind that shows teeth but not heart. "You look taller," she said, pulling me into a brief hug. "I feel older." She didn't respond. Roy wasn't there. He was working on the shed, she explained, gesturing vaguely toward the backyard. The inside of the house smelled like cinnamon and furniture polish. Clean. Too clean. As if she'd scrubbed the walls, hoping to wipe something off them. The embroidered sign still hung in the hallway, "Bless this home and all who enter." I stared at it longer than I meant to. That night, I unpacked my suitcase slowly. Every drawer felt smaller than I remembered. The corners of the room darker. I placed the Bible on my nightstand and the mittens beside it. Then I pulled the notebook from its hiding place floorboard, still creaked the same. I reread old entries. He watches me even when I pretend not to see. Mama says I make things up. I'm not a problem. I'm a person. I want someone to fight for me. Out loud. I added a new line. I came back, but I'm not here to please anyone. At dinner, Roy joined us with his usual grin. His hair was grayer, his belt tighter, but his eyes, those hadn't changed. Margie, he said, heard you've been giving Clara a run for her money. I didn't answer. I passed the biscuits. He chuckled. A little attitude does a girl good. Makes you strong. Mama sipped her sweet tea like it might drown her. Grandma broke the silence. Sometimes silence makes girls disappear. Roy's fork paused in midair. Just saying, Grandma added, folding her napkin. Too much quiet, and people start to vanish, even when they're still sitting at the table. Mama dropped her spoon. Over the next few days, I slipped into a rhythm of pretending. Pretending I liked oatmeal again. Pretending Roy's hand on my shoulder didn't feel like static. Pretending I didn't notice Mama avoiding my eyes. But at night, I wrote, and that notebook got heavier. One evening, I caught Roy standing outside my room. He didn't knock, just stood there, hand on the knob like he was remembering something. I opened the door. Can I help you? He blinked, surprised. Just checking in. Thought I heard something. You didn't. I held his gaze. Not defiant, not brave, just done. He stepped back. Good night, then. I closed the door slow with purpose and locked it. Sunday morning, Mama asked me to wear my yellow dress for church. The one Roy once said made me look like spring. I don't like that dress, I said. She frowned. It's just a dress. Not to him. The silence that followed stretched thin as thread. Then she said quietly, Margaret, can't you just try to let it go? I looked at her, really looked, and saw it. The fear, the shame, the calculation. She wasn't asking me to be quiet for his sake. She was asking me to be quiet for hers. And that hurt more than any touch ever could. After church, Roy offered to drive us home. Grandma insisted we take a separate car. Later that night, while drying dishes beside me, she whispered, You don't owe anyone your silence. I nodded, blinking fast. Even her, I asked. Especially her, she said. That week, I found a postcard tucked inside my Bible. No stamp, just a note. The loudest truths are the ones no one wants to hear. But say them anyway. Gee, I folded it into my notebook. That night, I sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed and wrote the first letter to someone outside our world. To Miss Eleanor Trask, school counselor. I don't know if you remember me, but I was in your office once in 3rd grade when I scraped my knee. You gave me a peppermint and said I was brave. I have something to tell you now. And I need someone to believe me. Sincerely, Margaret Ann Holloway. I sealed the envelope, placed it under Grandma's door, and waited. Because maybe it was time someone else finally spoke out loud for me or with me, but not instead of me. The morning the envelope disappeared, I knew someone had read it. I'd slipped it under Grandma's door just before bed, the one addressed to Miss Eleanor Trask, my old school counselor. No stamp, no return address. Just trembling handwriting and hope folded into 3 lines of confession. By sunrise, it was gone. Grandma didn't mention it over breakfast. Just handed me a biscuit and asked if I wanted apple butter or peach. I chose neither. My stomach was knots. Roy was gone early working on the truck according to Mama. She barely looked at me. I watched the syrup drip slow from her knife onto her toast. Watched it soak the bread like silence soaking a room. She didn't ask me why I was quiet. Maybe she thought she already knew. Maybe she didn't want to. That day passed like molasses, sticky slow and sweetly deceptive. 2 mornings later, there was a phone call. It came just after Mama stepped out to buy milk. The landline rang once, twice, then again, like it meant to insist. Grandma answered. Her face didn't change as she spoke. Yes, this is the Holloway residence. Pause. She's here, but not right now. May I ask who's calling? Another pause. Then her eyes flicked toward me, calm and wide. I see. Yes, that would be fine. She hung up slowly and turned toward me. That was Miss Trask. My heart flipped. She'd like to come for a visit. I didn't ask how she knew where to call. I didn't ask if she'd told Mama. I just nodded, suddenly cold, despite the spring sun streaming through the window. She arrived that Friday. Not in a suit, not in high heels, not with a clipboard, but in a soft gray cardigan, slacks, and a satchel worn at the seams. Her hair was more silver than I remembered, pulled back in a bun. She looked like someone's favorite aunt, not a professional listener of childhood truths. She stepped into the living room like she'd been there before. Hello, Margaret. I nodded. Hi. We sat. Grandma offered tea. Miss Trask accepted. Mama stayed in the kitchen, clattering dishes too loud to be accidental. Miss Trask waited a moment, then pulled something from her bag, my letter folded once neat. I read every word she said. I read it twice. My throat tightened. Do you believe me? She didn't blink. Yes, just that. Not a lecture, not a checklist, not a rehearsed speech, just belief. It landed in my chest like a stone, heavy, solid, undeniable. Then she added gently, I need to ask you a few questions, but only the ones you want to answer. Can we do that? I nodded, and we did. I don't remember everything I told her, not word for word, but I remember the way she listened, not like someone waiting to fix something, but like someone holding a lantern while I walked into a cave. I told her about the nightgown, about the door that never quite shut, about Mama's silence, about Grandma's hands. I didn't cry, not then. But when she asked, did anyone ever try to stop him, I broke. Because the answer was yes and no. After she left, the house felt smaller. Mama asked, did she say what she wanted? I shrugged, just wanted to talk. Mama didn't push, but I could feel her unraveling, not loudly, but like a sweater pulled slowly at the seams. That night, she came into my room. She sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wrinkle the quilt. I saw your letter. I looked up. Her hands were shaking. I didn't read it all. Just enough. I said nothing. She stared at the Bible on my nightstand. Then she whispered, when I was your age, something happened to me too. I froze. She kept her eyes down. But back then, no one believed girls. We were told to pray it away. And when that didn't work, we were told to forget. She took a deep breath. I tried to forget for you. Thought if I didn't say it, it wouldn't touch you. Her voice broke. I was wrong. I didn't hug her. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. But I didn't hate her either. We sat in silence. For once, it didn't feel like running. It felt like planting something. The next day, Miss Trask called again. She asked if I'd be willing to speak with someone from the county, a woman named Mrs. Hargrove. Not the police, not a judge, just someone who could listen, help explain my rights. I said yes. Mama didn't stop me. Roy didn't come home that night. On Monday, a social worker's sedan pulled into our drive. Plain brown car. No flashing lights. Just a woman with a calm voice, thick notebook, and eyes that never looked away when I spoke. She asked careful questions. I answered carefully. And somewhere between he touched my hair, and I was afraid to sleep, I began to feel seen. Mrs. Hargrove asked, what do you want to happen next? And for the first time, I answered without hesitation. I want him to leave. That night. Mama sat by the window with her hands clasped tight, like she was holding a prayer that hadn't been invented yet. And I wrote in my notebook, "The truth doesn't always need a scream. Sometimes it just needs to stop whispering." Roy came home 2 days after the social worker's visit. No one said where he'd been. He walked through the front door like it still belonged to him, set his coat on the hook, and nodded toward Mama. "Heard I missed some excitement," he said, voice even. Mama was slicing carrots at the counter. She didn't look up. "We had a guest," Roy chuckled. "You always did like an audience, Evie." I stood in the hallway, notebook in hand. I hadn't moved. I hadn't blinked. He turned to me next. "Margie." I didn't answer. "You still mad at me, huh?" he said. "All that teenage fire. I remember when your mama had it too." His words rolled off his tongue like smoke looking for somewhere to settle. But something was different now. Not just in me, in the air. He didn't come closer. And neither did I. That night at the dinner table, we ate in silence. Grandma said grace. Mama poured tea. Roy buttered his biscuit with the same slow precision he always had. Then he cleared his throat. I know folks have been saying things he said, eyes trained on his plate. And I know the world's changed a lot since I was a boy. Back then, what people called discipline is now abuse. What was affection is now suspect. He looked at me, then Mama. But I never laid a hand on Margie in anger. Never raised my voice. I've provided for this house. I've fixed what broke. No one responded, so he went on. And I won't be painted a monster just because a girl misread a man trying to care. That was the moment something inside Mama snapped, not loudly, but like glass underfoot. She placed her fork down, carefully, deliberately. "You didn't raise your voice, Roy. You lowered it, so no one else could hear." He stared. "And I let you," she continued, "because I thought surviving you was easier than confronting you. But I was wrong." Roy's face hardened. "Evie, don't." It wasn't a plea. It was a full stop. After dinner, I helped Grandma wash dishes. The water was too hot and my hands stung. But I didn't complain. "She finally said it," I whispered. Grandma nodded. Sometimes it takes decades to cough up the silence. The next morning, I overheard Mama on the phone. "Yes, Friday morning is fine. I'll be there." She hung up and walked past me in the hallway without a word. But something in her eyes looked settled. Not peaceful. Resolved. That evening, Roy didn't come home. His boots were gone. His jacket, too. But he left a note on the kitchen table. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted. You'll regret this." Mama tore it in half. Then again, until the pieces looked like confetti made of threats. She didn't cry. Neither did I. On Friday morning, she put on her only blue dress, brushed her hair, and asked Grandma to watch the house. "I'm going to the courthouse," she said. Why, I asked. She met my eyes. To file a statement. I held her purse for a second. "Do you need me to come?" She shook her head. "No, baby. This one's mine to do." She returned before lunch, pale but upright. We didn't speak about it, but that night she came to my room with an envelope, inside a copy of the filed complaint, and a short note in her handwriting. "I should have protected you. I didn't, but I will now. I promise." We never had a big talk. No fire and tears confession. No TV moment of reconciliation. But she started sitting beside me in the evenings. She brought me hot chocolate without asking how I liked it, but remembered the second time. She let me keep the notebook on the table where anyone could see it. And when I wrote in it, she didn't look away. One night, a week later, she said, "When I was pregnant with you, I used to hum to my belly. Your daddy thought it was silly." I looked up. "What did you hum?" She smiled. "Amazing Grace." We sat in that song for a while, neither of us singing, but both of us hearing. The house was still,
but not the same kind of still as before. Not the kind you survive, the kind you build from. I wrote in my notebook that night he left, but so did the girl who used to need him to. It was a Thursday afternoon when he came back. The air had started to warm again, buds forming on the dogwood outside my window, birds testing songs they hadn't sung all winter. I was helping Grandma hang laundry in the backyard when the sound of gravel under tires made us both freeze. The truck was familiar, too familiar.
Roy stepped out like nothing had changed.
Like this wasn't the house where truth had finally been spoken. Like I was still a child who wouldn't look him in the eye. He didn't come to the door. He walked straight to the backyard where we stood. His boots crunched over the grass, and he stopped just a few feet from us.
"I came for my tools," he said, voice steady. "Didn't mean to cause trouble."
Grandma didn't move. She stood between him and me, laundry pins still in hand.
"The shed's unlocked," she said flatly.
He looked at her, then at me.
"Margie, just wanted to say I'm sorry if anything I did ever made you uncomfortable. That wasn't my intention."
It was the most he'd ever admitted. But I saw it for what it was, a performance. A rehearsed script meant to plant doubt. I took a step forward, not past Grandma, just enough so he could see me clearly. "It wasn't what you said," I replied. "It was what you kept doing. After I said no. After I went still." His face twitched.
"You're confused, sweetheart. Don't call me that."
His eyes narrowed. "I never hurt you." I didn't flinch. Then why did I learn to sleep with a chair against the door? The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Even the birds stopped. Mama stepped out onto the porch then. She wasn't dressed for confrontation. No makeup, no shoes, just her house dress and bare feet. But her presence filled the space like thunder before rain.
"You're not welcome here anymore, Roy."
His jaw tensed. "This is still my house." "No," she cut in. "It was never yours. You just lived in it." "I paid for the roof over your head, and I paid for it in silence." Her voice didn't rise, but it landed like a hammer.
"Go get your tools," she said, "and then get off this property."
He went to the shed.
Didn't slam the door. Didn't speak again. Just gathered his things, loaded the truck, and drove off. No goodbye. No threats. Just gone.
That night, I had a dream. I was back in that room, the one from when I was 10. The doorknob rattled. The floor creaked. But this time, when I turned around, the door wasn't closed. It was wide open.
And standing there instead of Roy was me. Older, taller, steady.
Watching the younger me with gentle eyes.
"You don't have to stay here," she said. "You can walk out." So I did.
When I woke, the light was pouring through the window.
Warm. Real.
I walked to the kitchen where Mama and Grandma were already sitting.
Nobody said good job. Nobody said I'm proud.
But Grandma poured me coffee, my first cup, black, no sugar. I sipped. Bitter. Grown up.
"Tastes like truth," I said.
Grandma smiled. Mama reached for my hand. "You did what I couldn't," she whispered. "You saved yourself."
I didn't feel brave, but I did feel free.
That weekend, we boxed up his things. The shed, the closet, even the junk drawer in the kitchen where he kept screws and receipts and loose change. We donated most of it, burned some of it. I kept one item, a wrench with his initials scratched into the handle. Not out of sentiment, out of memory. I placed it in a mason jar on the windowsill. A reminder. Not all tools build. Some destroy. But they can be taken away. The Sunday after I went back to church for the first time since before the letter, Miss Trask met me on the steps. She didn't ask for details. Just hugged me tight, then handed me a bookmark with pressed violets inside. "For the pages you haven't written yet," she said. That afternoon, Mama made peach cobbler, the kind she used to make on my birthdays. The smell filled the house sweet and golden. As we ate, I noticed something. For the first time in years, all the windows were open. The curtains danced like they'd waited their whole lives to be moved by the wind. I went to bed that night and didn't lock the door. Not out of forgetfulness, but because I didn't need to anymore. The fear had finally left the house with the man who brought it. I didn't speak about Roy for a long time after he left. Not because I couldn't, but because I no longer had to. The words had already done their work. They'd been spoken, written, read. They had broken the air open, cracked the floor beneath him, and given me ground to stand on. Now my silence wasn't submission. It was sovereignty. Spring passed like breath soft, full, and alive. Mama planted herbs in the kitchen window. Grandma started baking again. Her pie crusts came back to life the way old hymns do, slow and sacred. And I started walking to the library again, just once a week at first, always on Thursdays, always alone. Miss Trask had arranged for me to help after school shelving books, updating the card catalog, preparing bookmarks for the children's story hour. The library smelled like dust and ink and possibility. One afternoon, while reshelving the memoir section, I pulled out a thin hardback titled The Rooms We Leave Behind. Inside, someone had underlined 3 sentences in blue ink. Healing isn't a sunrise. It's a flicker, and you have to choose to follow it. I stood there a long time, just holding the book against my chest. I didn't check it out. I didn't need to. The words were already with me. One evening at home, I asked Mama if we could go through the attic. She blinked. It's dusty and full of junk. I know, I said, but I think it's time. We pulled down the ladder and climbed carefully one step at a time. The attic was a graveyard of forgotten seasons, boxes of outgrown clothes, tinsel from long past Christmases, old high school yearbooks with curled edges. We sat side by side and opened the boxes slowly. She pulled out a baby bonnet. You wore this once. I found an old lunchbox, the metal kind, with cartoon characters on the front. Inside, a note from Grandma yellowed with age. For the days when your voice gets tired, remember I still hear it. I didn't remember ever seeing that note, but my fingers knew how to fold it. We laughed over broken toys, cried over a photo of Daddy holding me half-blurred mid-laugh. We didn't speak about Roy. We didn't need to. Later that night, I wrote a letter. Not to Miss Trask, not to the county, not even to Grandma, to myself. Dear Margaret, you survived. Not just the man, not just the house, but the silence. You turned it into something soft enough to carry and sharp enough to never forget. I'm proud of you. Love me. The next day, I walked to the post office and mailed it addressed back to our house. Grandma chuckled when it arrived. You finally getting mail from the person who knows you best, she said. I taped it to the wall above my desk. Every time I looked up, it reminded me I was real. And I was home. In May, our church held its annual spring women's breakfast. Miss Trask invited me to speak. At first, I said no. What would I say? But then I remembered the book in the library. Healing isn't a sunrise. It's a flicker. And flickers need wind to grow. So I said yes. The day of the event, I wore a dress I hadn't touched in years, soft blue with tiny white flowers. Mama brushed my hair. Grandma handed me a folded piece of paper with a single word on it. Steady. When I stepped up to the podium, my hands were trembling. The room was full of women, grandmothers, mothers, daughters. Some had eyes like mine eyes that had seen things no child should. I cleared my throat. Good morning. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 14 years old, and I'd like to talk to you about what silence can do and what we can do with it. And then I spoke. Not all of it. Not every scar, but enough. Enough to open a door in someone else. Afterward, a woman with silver hair came up to me in tears. She didn't speak. She just pressed something into my palm. It was a paper bird folded from a church bulletin. Inside the wing she'd written, I was 9.
I told no one, until now.
That night, I sat on the porch swing and watched the stars come out.
Grandma joined me, mug of tea in hand.
We rocked in silence for a while. Then she said, "You know, the world doesn't always reward truth."
I know, but it recognizes it.
I leaned my head on her shoulder, and for the first time in my life, I felt taller than what had happened to me. The next morning, I found a line from Grandma pinned to the fridge. "You lit a candle in a room I was too afraid to enter. Thank you for showing me how." The envelope arrived on a Monday.
No return address, just my name carefully printed in blue ink.
Inside, a letter typed on plain stationery.
Dear Miss Holloway, we are pleased to inform you that your essay, "The Voice I Found in Silence," has been selected as a regional finalist in the Youth Resilience Writing Competition. Your story was described by our judges as haunting, courageous, and unshakably honest. We would be honored to invite you to share it in person at the Regional Forum in Raleigh, North Carolina next month. Sincerely, Catherine Drew, Program Director.
I read it twice.
Then I ran to Grandma's room.
She read the letter slowly, lips moving with every word.
When she reached the end, she folded it, pressed it flat, and said only one thing. You're going.
I wasn't sure at first.
Raleigh was 3 hours away. The forum meant a microphone stranger's hotel room's name tags.
But Grandma said, if you're old enough to carry the truth, you're old enough to stand with it.
And Mama said, I'll sew a dress you can wear with pride. So I said yes. In the weeks leading up to the trip, the house filled with movement, hymns being measured, shoes being polished, a new journal gifted and signed. For the words you haven't met yet, I practiced reading my essay aloud alone in my room again and again.
The first time I cried halfway through. The second time I trembled.
By the 10th time, I could hear strength in my own voice. It didn't sound like someone begging to be believed anymore. It sounded like someone who already was.
The night before we left, Mama placed an old suitcase on my bed, inside a small photograph tucked between folded socks.
It was me at age 6, holding a popsicle on the 4th of July. Sticky-faced eyes, wide dress, wrinkled. Mama pointed to it.
That little girl never got to speak.
I nodded. But this one will.
The morning of the forum, the city buzzed louder than I remembered. Car horns, crosswalk signals, voices weaving through open doors and summer heat.
Inside the auditorium, the chairs were velvet and the lights warm. There were people of all ages, some young like me, some old like Grandma, all holding pens and stories. I sat backstage waiting. My hands sweated. My knees bounced. But in my pocket was a note from Grandma folded into fourths. They may not have lived it, but they'll feel it. Speak steady. Speak for the girl who couldn't. When my name was called, I walked to the podium. I didn't trip. I didn't stutter. I just breathed deep and sure and began. My name is Margaret Ann Holloway. And when I was 10 years old, I learned how dangerous silence could be. The room leaned in. I told them about rooms that didn't lock, about adults who chose comfort over truth, about what it meant to whisper for years and what it felt like the first time someone finally said, I believe you. I didn't cry, but someone in the front row did. When I finished, they stood, not clapping for drama, clapping for survival, clapping for the girl who walked out of the room she wasn't supposed to escape. After the forum, a teenage boy came up to me. He didn't say much, just me too. That was enough. We drove home in silence, but it wasn't the old kind. Not fear, not shame, just reflection. At a gas station stop, Grandma asked if I wanted a soda. I chose root beer. She raised an eyebrow. Trying new things. I grinned. Maybe, or maybe just starting to like my voice in bubbles. She laughed so hard she snorted. Back home, Mama framed the letter from the forum and hung it beside the kitchen clock.
To remind us that time doesn't heal everything. But sometimes it gives you the stage.
One morning, a week later, I sat on the front porch with my new journal. The birds were louder than usual. Maybe I was just quieter inside. I opened the book and wrote. Every silence I lived through became a path. Some paths are hard, but they're still ours to walk. And maybe the best thing we can do is leave breadcrumbs behind so the next girl knows she's not walking alone. That evening, I slipped a copy of my speech into the church library's memoir section, right next to the rooms we leave behind. On the back, I wrote in pencil, "For the girl who finds this next." The summer I turned 15, nothing big happened. No news crews came, no court date, no reunions or final confrontations. Just the kind of days you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Like sweet tea that only tastes right when it's been in the fridge overnight. Or porch swings creaking in rhythm with the wind. I started volunteering at the community center on Tuesdays. Miss Trask had suggested it said they needed someone to organize donated books, help the younger girls write poetry, or just be there. The first day, I met Lila, 9 years old, quiet as a button, always doodling in the margins of her notebook. She asked if she could sit next to me. I said yes. She didn't ask about my story, but she started writing hers. At home, Mama returned to quilting. Squares of old clothes, Daddy's work shirts, my baby blankets, even one of Roy's flannel sleeves stitched together, repurposed, redeemed. "I don't want to forget," she said once, holding a square up to the light. "I just want it to mean something better now." One afternoon, Grandma took me for a walk by the river trail. The water moved slow, gentle, steady. She told me a story I'd never heard before about the first boy who broke her heart, the way her mama comforted her with ginger cookies and a cold rag to the forehead. "Heartbreak comes in many forms," she said, "but it always teaches you where the soft parts are." We sat on a bench near the bend in the river. A butterfly landed on the hem of her dress. She didn't move. Neither did I. In August, I mailed a letter to the state program that sponsored the writing forum. Inside, I included a thank you note, a copy of my latest journal entry, and a poem. Some wounds are not loud. They sit in the corners, ask nothing but change the shape of every room you enter after. A week later, I received a reply. Handwritten. Margaret. Thank you for reminding us that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just keeps showing up. Keep writing. We'll keep reading. I pinned it to the bulletin board above my desk. That same month, I asked Mama a question I'd never dared ask before. "What would you have named me if Daddy hadn't chosen Margaret?" She smiled a little sad. "Clara, after my grandmother." "Can I use it as a pen name?" She reached over, squeezed my hand. "You can use whatever name you need to keep telling the truth." So I did. The first time my words were published in the local paper, they were under the byline, Clara H., a piece titled What We Do With Our Quiet. Mama clipped it and taped it to the fridge right next to a grocery list and a recipe for cornbread. Grandma read it aloud to her church group, and someone I still don't know who left a bouquet of wildflowers on our front steps the next morning. By fall, the house no longer felt like his. The shadows weren't heavier than the light anymore. There were still bad days. Days I couldn't quite finish a sentence. Days the smell of a certain cologne on a stranger made my lungs tighten. But they passed. And each time they did, I added a small mark in my notebook. A sun, a leaf, a feather. Symbols of what didn't break me. On the day the first frost arrived, I stood barefoot on the porch just for a moment. The cold kissed my toes and reminded me I was still here. That night, Mama tucked a slip of paper into my journal. On it, in her handwriting, "The past may whisper, but you, my girl, you sang louder." Grandma's hair turned completely white that winter. She started writing again, too. Letters to women she hadn't spoken to in decades. Notes of forgiveness. Postcards of gratitude. Birthday cards for babies who now had babies of their own. I asked her once what made her start. She said, "Because you reminded me the story ain't over, just because the worst part passed. That spring, I planted my first daffodils in the backyard. They took weeks to bloom, but when they did, they came all at once, golden, defiant, open. I sat beside them with a cup of coffee and wrote, "Healing isn't just what you do to survive. It's how you make things grow again, even when no one's watching." One evening, Lila brought me a folded piece of paper, a poem, her first. There once was a girl who kept all her words inside a box, until another girl said, "I have one too," and they opened them together. I didn't need to cry, but I let myself, because sometimes tears aren't weakness. They're just water for the roots. And now I sit here older, not done, not over it, but forward, writing this years later, so the next girl, the one who finds this story, knows she's not alone, knows that her silence is not shame, knows that even if the world doesn't clap, the wind still moves the leaves for her. My name is Margaret Ann Holloway, and once upon a time, I was the girl in the quiet room. Now I'm the one who left the door open, just in case you need to walk through too. Sometimes healing doesn't come with applause or headlines, just a quiet house, an open notebook, and a name written in full. Margaret Ann Holloway never forgot what happened behind that door, but she also never let it define who she would become. Her story teaches us that silence can bury, but it can also bloom if we choose to speak to write, to believe the next girl who dares to whisper. Survival isn't just about staying, it's about becoming and showing up for the ones still finding their way. Because every truth spoken out loud leaves a light on for someone else. Have you ever carried a story in silence? We'd be honored if you shared your thoughts below or simply left a word for someone still gathering courage.